just want to do God's will.
What you're seeking is a blessing from God.
You must expect a miracle.
You have the power of choice.
Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ.
Welcome to Life Today Live. Randy Robinson here, and we're going to have a good conversation because that's what we do here every day, live at noon Central. And if you're watching us live, we welcome you to be a part of the conversation. Hello, Judy. I hope Canada is wonderful this time of the year for you. Good to have you here. I have an interesting guest today. Her name is Rebecca Lynn, and she is the author of a new book called Proud Police Wife. Looks like this. She also hosts a podcast called Proud Police Wife. And her and her husband live up in the D.C. area of our nation's capital. And honestly, I know lots of police officers, lots of people in law enforcement. I just kind of shake my head and I go, I don't know how you do that. And to be married to someone in law enforcement, especially, you know, in certain parts of the country where they're not treated well, and their lives are at risk every time they go on the job. That's just a level of stress that I just can't comprehend. So you're gonna hear some interesting things along that. But it's interesting how the things that wives of officers deal with is really it's an intensified version of what a lot of us go through, whether you're talking about fear or the need for community or the sense of loneliness. And so I invite you to be part of the conversation today. If you haven't hit like or subscribe or share or follow, those are all great buttons to hit. And we welcome you to the program. Rebecca, it's great to have you on Life Today Live.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to talk with you today and to just share a little bit about this lifestyle, but also about how to deal with things that, you know, all of us kind of deal with, but maybe may not understand when it relates to law enforcement. So
the book is a devotional, 90 devotions, and it's on the front of the cover. It says for women behind the badge. I want to get into some of the things that are maybe unique to someone in your position, and also some of the things that are kind of, you know, we can all relate to. But give us an idea of the things that you're addressing in this devotional book.
Sure. So in the devotional, like you said, it's 90 devotions. Women behind the badge means honestly anyone that may be a wife, significant other, fiance, mother of someone in law enforcement. And in the book, I wanted to, you know, I always had it on my heart to serve this community. And when I looked for resources years and years ago, when my husband first started in law enforcement in the early 2000s, I didn't find a lot of resources. I would Google and come up dry. And it was only after talking with so many other spouses and family members did I learn that they were kind of feeling the same way that I was. They were longing for other resources and support as well. So in this devotional, I give just relatable stories to what living with someone in law enforcement is like, and pair that with just some empowering action steps for family members to think through, in addition to scripture and prayer. And so a lot of the things that I tackle in this book and I talk about on my website is things that many other people deal with, just like you said, kind of a amped up version. So I talk a lot about the feelings that we may be having, like fear, loneliness. Some spouses deal with isolation because they feel like they can't talk about what our lifestyle is like because many people don't understand. And so how to really combat that with, leaning into God and building your relationship with him so that because really we truly are not alone, even though we may be dealing with a lot of these feelings and physically feeling alone, we are truly not alone. And one of the other things that I really talk about a lot is connection. Just as human beings, we crave connection. We want to have relationships with people. And when our loved one is out working, and it may be that we're dealing with opposite schedules or shift work, and I may go sometimes 6-7 days without seeing my husband. Wow. And that can be really difficult when you are not used to that. So, but realizing that, yes, we're craving connection, but you can also build a support system around you. And that's for anyone that's dealing with, loneliness, finding that connection in a friend, or maybe someone that's walking similar paths as you. I talk about how it doesn't just have to be someone, like I don't just have to be friends with another law enforcement spouse to be able to share what I'm going through. I'm friends with, a wife that her husband is a pilot, and I'm friends with, another military spouse. It can be other people that generally just want to understand your lifestyle or are just there for you to give support. And that's for anybody. Having that support system in your life is important, especially when you're dealing with just uncertain or hard times to navigate, like law enforcement or whatever it may be that you're going through in your life.
Yeah, I'm curious because of the nature of the police work, you right. do connect with a lot of law enforcement wives just naturally, and
right.
that's common, whatever circle we're in. But that does mean that you're connecting with some people who may not be Christians, or whose faith has really been put on the back burner. Maybe they were raised in church, but now they're not active. I'm curious how the faith, your deep faith, influences your relationships with other women who are going through the same difficulties you are, but don't necessarily look to God for that support.
Sure. So I always try to share a story, maybe not right off the bat when I meet them, but I share a story about how, I grew up going to church and believing that the best way to have a relationship with God was to be in church every Sunday. Well, when I married my husband, we were high school sweethearts. So we were, had a relationship before law enforcement and then after, and then we started having children. And I felt like my faith was tested a lot during this time because I couldn't just go to church on Sunday mornings with my husband or as a family because my husband was working. And it was really difficult for me to go into church knowing that my baby would be in a nursery crying because we were having, feeding issues and different things. I felt like I could not build my relationship with God maybe the way that I thought that I needed to or that I wanted to. And so I share this because God is not in a building. God is not, we do not have to have a relationship with God one specific way. And so I really had to rely on finding ways that worked for our lifestyle during that really hard season. It was okay for me to open my Bible and have, time, spiritual time when I am up late at night feeding my baby. That is okay. And God is going to meet us wherever we are. And so I don't try to obviously push my faith on other people, but at the same time, I do like to share that story to let them know that, when we're going through the most difficult times is when we need God the most. And we don't have to do it the way everybody else is doing it. We can form a relationship with him, and it's truly a relationship. And we can form that relationship with him, no matter what way looks best for our lifestyle. Yeah. And, we can go to church. Maybe it's just better on Wednesdays, or, on Saturday evenings. Like you can form small groups with people or join in on small groups. And really just having those conversations with them. I had one wife message recently that she was not, a strong believer, but she's been a follower of mine for a really long time. And she, trusts me and likes what I have to say. So she bought my devotional just to, see more about this lifestyle and hear from me. And she said that, it totally changed her perspective on, because yes, she was going or was not going to church anymore, but she did as a kid, but she had just a bad experience. And so she needed a different way to connect with God. And this was her way. And so I thought that says a lot about how, a person can, be open to forming their relationship a little bit more, even if they had, a bad experience with church or it wasn't part of their daily life anymore.
So all of you legalistic types out there that want to quote one of the Old Testament Ten Commandments to me about remembering the Sabbath day, and we must keep it holy. And whether you want to argue whether that's Saturday or Sunday, you will find no sympathy from me, because I do believe that in a post-Christ world, every day is holy in that we relate to God every single day, wherever we're at, whether it's in a church building or, like Rebecca says, while you're trying to feed your baby at night. So I do like that. I will say, though, that as you say, Rebecca, community is important. Being isolated spiritually is not the way really I see God designing it in Scripture, and that means everybody recognizes that need for community. What do you find when people come into your community who have been isolated? What are they getting out of this I'll call it fellowship, but this sense of not being alone?
Yes, that's a great question. Honestly, they just want someone to talk to that can relate to what they're going through, because nothing feels worse than being physically isolated and then also feeling like you're the only one going through your situation. And so a lot of these spouses that come in, we just are open and share and talk, and we're honest with them. I'm honest with them, but at the same time, I want them to just know that they're not alone, because chances are, no matter what we're going through in the world, someone else is going through something similar. It might not be exactly the same situation in our shoes, but someone is going through something similar. And so knowing that you can resonate with a person, and when they share their stories and what they've been through, chances are, especially in this community, there are little pieces where we can say, oh, yep, that happened to me too. And when you're able to just have that conversation with people and be able to relate to people, then it's a lot easier to build that connection and bring those walls down and know that, okay, these are people I can trust. These are people I can talk to or have fellowship with, or, pray with, and really grow that relationship with God, and then also together.
I'm guessing that in your position, people know you're a Christian, and you're dealing with people who oftentimes face abnormal things. In other words, we've seen police officers killed way too often over the last several years. Do you ever get the real challenges where someone's like, why would a good God let this happen to my husband, kind of thing?
All the time. I actually talked with a widow recently. And so she had, a lot of those feelings herself. And I don't, pretend to ever know what it's like to walk in that person's shoes that may be dealing with a traumatic event or losing their spouse or anything like that. But I do get that from time to time. And I do try to just remind them, and it's a good reminder for myself, that God does not promise that things will be perfect. God does not, we know that we live in a broken world. And I do try to, there's no easy way to put it when trauma happens to a police officer or a law enforcement family. I wish they didn't have to go through it. It's heartbreaking. And I don't want to ever say that, oh, this happened for a reason or anything like that. But I do always lean into prayer, and I do try to encourage others to lean into prayer and to know that, God has a way of teaching us things that sometimes we don't understand when it's happening. And it's very hard to relate to those things relate them to those things when a life is lost, when someone loses a loved one. Sure. But at the same time, I do know that God is here, and he's, there for us. And I do try to have those conversations to just hear them and hear what they're going through a little bit better, so that I can try to give some sort of encouragement to let them know that, other people feel the way that they feel too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's what a friend of mine who is a police chaplain here locally calls the ministry of presence, just being there for them.
Yeah.
So that's good. Yeah. All right. We're talking to Rebecca Lynn, and this is her book, Proud Police Wife. She also has the podcast, Proud Police Wife, and she's out there. And I gotta ask you, Rebecca, and I'm sure you get this a lot, but I'm really curious because, geez, you know what? it's been a year, almost 2 years now. We run through these in our culture, these periods of time where the police are really vilified, and oftentimes it's on the heels of a police action that is not good. That the majority of police are like, oh gosh, I can't believe that officer did that. That's not right. And then the culture, for whatever selfish gain, wants to paint all police officers as horrible, which any intelligent person knows is not true. How do you go through that? Because that would probably be one of the harder things for me. I mean, we get it when some preacher falls or does something bad and they want to paint every Christian as a fraud or whatever. It's easy to get resentful I find. How do you walk through those times where police are being unjustly vilified?
It's one of the reasons I do what I do, because I started initially doing this because I wanted to serve and pour into this community and create a ministry to help other spouses. But the past 2 years, I've gotten even more vocal at giving support to this community, because many law enforcement families, when that's happening, feel like they do not have a voice. And so I really wanted to help be that voice, that positive voice for law enforcement families, because I won't lie, my husband's been in law enforcement over 15 years, and the past 2 to 3 years have absolutely been the most difficult because of things that we've seen on the media, the dehumanization of law enforcement officers, and just giving them this blanket generalization that, like you said, like they're all bad. Mm-hmm. And honestly, we want to scream from the rooftops that, law enforcement officers and their families, when we see an action that's poor from, a police officer, we want nothing more than for justice to be served and for them to not be doing that job anymore, and for them to not be giving law enforcement a bad name. And what I try to remember, and what I try to tell other people too, is that a lot of times when things like that happen, we're seeing the negative. The negative is coming up in the media, on the news, on social media, and we have to remember that there's more supporters out there than there are naysayers and non-believers. There really are. But sometimes when there is just so much negative rhetoric, it can be hard to see those supporters come to light. Mm-hmm. They too will sometimes feel like they can't say anything because they have to take a stance on a different issue. And it can be hard, but we have to look for those people that are saying thank you and are appreciative, and cling to those instances of good and appreciation, because they really are out there. Mm-hmm. And we also, one other thing is that I would say to any family that's dealing with negativity is, what I try to do and tell others is to pour into our home even more. Give our spouse, the loved one that might be a first responder, the support and the love that they need, because they may not be getting it out on the streets, they may not be getting it at work, but knowing that they have that peace and support system at home means the world. So just pouring into our loved ones even harder, so that it really does try to negate a little bit of that negativity.
Yeah, that's good, and you certainly have my respect, my thanks. Anyone out there watching who is in law enforcement, we say thank you. That's why we're doing this interview today. So here's to support you. I want to shift a little bit gears, because there's something that a lot of people will relate to. You mentioned pilots, and doctors. This can happen to, and it can happen across any marriage where there is the time apart, where schedules conflict, where work takes someone away for long periods of time. How do you and your husband make sure that you guys are intentional about maintaining the relationship? And we like this phrase, quality time, but I don't know. I think a lot of times it's quantity time. What have you guys done to maintain a healthy relationship through the years?
That's a great question, and the first thing is, for us, and for anyone that might be dealing with, shift work or, wonky schedules, is it's a huge mindset shift, is, not looking at maybe an entire day off together or an entire weekend off together, because that's not always how our schedules work. Is we really have to maximize the time that we do have. So there's some days where we only get 1 hour together. So you use the word intentional, and that's one that I use all the time, because we have to be intentional. We can say, okay, for that hour, we could talk about who needs to let the dog out and who took the trash out last, or we could actually get past the surface level questions and choose to use that 1 hour of time really connecting. It's about connection and keeping that connection going and alive. And, you can pray together. A lot of times we're praying separately. I'm praying for my spouse, or my spouse is praying, for me, but really praying together as well. And knowing that you can, move mountains by praying together, not just about the job, but about your family. And like going back to the connection piece, just making sure that you're doing that daily connection. That is what has helped us all these years. Because if I go like 6-7 days without seeing my spouse, we have still found a way to connect. Sometimes we use, what's called a Marco Polo app. I don't know if you've heard of it before, but it's like a video walkie-talkie where we can leave each other a quick message. The other person doesn't have to be on. So we do things like that. Even if it's just text messages or sticky notes, we're finding a way to connect with each other that's beyond those, hey, can you please pick up milk? Like, it has to be a little bit deeper than that. And doing that every single day. So you don't feel like, while you may be a little lonely and you may miss your spouse and you may be ready for them to, have a day off together, you have still connected every single day, even if it's only for a couple minutes. So you don't feel like that connection is lost and you have to pick up now days later.
Right. No, that's good. What's been the hardest part for you?
Honestly, the hardest part for me, I think, was entering motherhood. And getting through the academy and like field training was definitely hard, but entering motherhood and trying to figure out how to now get several kids to bed while my spouse is working night shift, figuring out all those routines, because we had routines. And then every time he has shift changes or gets a promotion, things change again. So having to really shift and pivot a lot so that it not just, these choices don't just impact me and my husband, but they also impact our children. And so making sure that we're on the same page as far as parenting goes. Sometimes I have to be the mom and the dad. And my husband is very supportive and a very involved parent, but he, when the kids are fighting, I can't call him and interrupt him while he's, doing something. Right. So I really have to, pick up. It might be some days where it's 80-20 in the relationship. So all those juggling, that goes on with parenting and figuring ways to make the different shifts work and getting your kids to just understand and be understanding of what their parent does. And that, I try to tell them God needs them right now in that situation more than he needs, daddy at home. And it's hard to understand that, especially when, my husband might be working Christmas and we have to celebrate 2 or 3 days later. Yeah. They don't understand at first. And I will say now they're getting much better at it, but trying to teach them that the time that we're together, it's about the memories we make and who is with us, not the day on the calendar. Yeah.
Yeah. To a child, Santa had to make an arrest probably doesn't make a lot of sense to them.
No.
So I'm curious though, how are your kids dealing with it? Because it's one thing for an adult to say, okay, here's how we're going to deal with the fear of losing your spouse because their job is very risky. But for a child, I mean, that would probably be the hardest part for me if I were in that position. Would be knowing that something could happen where my children would be, without a dad. That would be. I've faced a little bit of that, but not every day like you guys have.
Right.
How do you cope with that? I can't even comprehend that one.
Our kids are, and not just ours, but other law enforcement families. Our kids are so resilient, and really, I think it's one of the ways that they deal with it is the way that we talk with them and have conversations. And any questions that they have, we always answer more in a kid-friendly way, but also honestly as best as we can. We try to let them know that no matter what in life, we could walk out the door tomorrow and not come back home. And it's not just because of law enforcement, that's for anybody. And so we try not to instill fear in them at all. Instead, we want them to pray about things, to lean into their faith, and to really know that we have to walk by, faith, not by sight. And that, if something did happen, typically it's not a question or a topic that we've talked about a lot, only if they have specific questions. Sometimes they get asked things at school, so they come home and they want to have conversations about it. And we openly talk about it. And those conversations can be hard at times, but we let them know that we love them and that mommy and daddy always have, a plan as best as we can. Meaning, if we knew if something happened that they would be taken care of, and we don't go into, too many details, but we want them to feel safe. But we also don't lie. We don't say that nothing will ever happen, because we don't know that. So we try to just be incredibly honest with them, and then also encourage them to, pray about it.
Oh, geez. It's one thing to consider the spouses of those in law enforcement. But man, when you start to consider the children, that's a call to prayer right there for anyone who's not in law enforcement. You want to add something to your prayer list. Pray for the children of those who are, because that's a heavy place. I want to show people your website. This is proudpolicewife.com. And I'm pointing this out because if anyone's watching and they want some resources, you've got your podcast, you got your blog. What all can they get? Because some people will need to plug into you, or maybe some of those watching knows someone who needs to go to your website for a resource. What will they get when they go there?
So there are hundreds and hundreds of blog posts, and I talk about anything from, parenting small children to dealing with, shift work, to dealing with fear and loneliness and isolation. And I talk about all of those things on my blog. I also link to the podcast. There's also tabs there to find support and resources for like sites that I recommend, like nonprofits, counseling services, things like that will provide support. If I don't have a resource for it, I try to direct them to a resource that I trust. I also do an annual conference, which is coming up. It's completely virtual, and it's coming up April 25th to 29th. So that's up for people to register for. There's a free general admission option, and I bring together 10 expert speakers from our community to just pour into this community more and talk about topics. And everything is pre-recorded, so people can watch it any point in time, whenever is best for them. They don't have to deal with missed work or childcare or anything like that.
No, that's great. And so is it in person or online or both?
All virtual. Everything is, all virtual. Yes.
Okay. So wherever you're at, great resource for you right there. Rebecca, I appreciate your time. I appreciate what you're doing and the courage that it takes just to get through the day. Is there anything else you want to mention that I haven't? Because I want to give you full opportunity to tell people how they can be enriched and encouraged by what you're doing.
Thank you. Well, the only thing I would add is I know that there are probably a lot of listeners that are not law enforcement. And so I would just ask that if you do see a law enforcement officer, or you happen to know a family, law enforcement family, just thank them, because it seems like, two simple words that seem, meaningless, but really they're incredibly powerful. Just saying thank you to a law enforcement officer can honestly get them to the end of their shift till they're home safely with their family, because they experience more, trauma and danger out in the world that some of us don't ever experience in our lifetime. And so knowing that they're appreciated for what they do, and then telling these families, whether you're at church or just out and about, telling these families just thank you for your sacrifice will mean the absolute world to them.
Yeah, I'm glad you point that out, because we hear that a lot, and I think you start to take it for granted a little bit. But you just emphasizing that it does, it can get someone to the end of their shift. That's That's a beautiful thing, and that's easy for us to do. So appreciate the reminder there. And again, thank you for sharing and all that you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate you guys hanging out, watching. If you know someone who is in law enforcement, share this with them. This will encourage them. And maybe even pick up the book, register for the conference at proudpolicewife.com. And let's encourage each other. Let's get each other through the difficult times and point people to Christ at the same time, because that's the ultimate solution to all the issues. Appreciate you guys hanging out. We've got more great interviews coming up all next week, so I invite you to be a part right here on Life Today Live. We'll see you again next time.
To make America a better nation. All we say to America, be true to what you said on paper.